You're watching Avoiding the Dangers of EMF Exposure by Dr. Alyssa Gall on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Whole Life Medicine Alleviate series. Keep in the loop about future webinars and events on whole-life-medicine.com. All right, so hello and welcome to Avoiding the Dangers of EMF Exposure. My name is Dr. Alyssa Gall, as many of you know, and I will be your guide this evening about all things irradiating. So as usual, this presentation is given in the context of the whole life medicine model. And when we're talking about EMF, we're talking about clean slate points in Alleviate in the whole life medicine model. So radiation can be created by human technology, obviously, like microwaves and cell phones, radios, light bulbs, diagnostic and medical applications like X-rays, or they're naturally occurring like the sun or radioactive elements in the Earth's crust, radiation trapped in the Earth's magnetic field, stars, and other astrophysical objects also emit radiation. But Earth's biggest source of radiation is actually the sun. And although the Earth is protected from a lot of the external EMFs by a really big magnetic field, we're all naturally exposed to EMFs. It's really the incredible increase in the sheer amount of man-made electromagnetic fields that we should think of as something to consider creating avoidance strategies around, kind of like a detox. So let's take a look at what I mean. So this is a website you can take a look at. It's wiggle.net, wigle.net. And you can see on the top left, that is the year 2004. So not very long ago, the sheer volume of cell towers, Wi-Fi, smart meters has gone from this small amount of purple to this incredible amount of purple and yellow with drift over the ocean. So it's just an absolutely astonishingly high amount of EMFs that have been generated in the last less than 20 years. So this technology is moving faster probably than our ability to predict what it's going to do. And so that's really what I'm excited to talk to you about today, because I think lots of people have questions about this, and it's sometimes hard to answer. So I'm going to start because the answer to the question actually requires some particular information. So here's an overview of electromagnetic phenomena and the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, you might have seen this in some way, shape, or form before, or maybe you've only seen the part that's about light. But electromagnetism is referring to the forces that accompany each other in fields. So again, that's both naturally and in man-made applications. So when you have a moving electric current, that produces a magnetic field and vice versa. So electric and magnetic waves come together. They travel together through space as waves of electromagnetic radiation, and each one actually sustains the other one. There doesn't have to be material substance to make this happen. So all of these forces travel at the speed of light. They only differ from each other in their frequency, and the frequency refers to the number of waves per second that make up that particular type of radiation. So the slowest waves are geomagnetic. You can see this here on the extreme left of this diagram under extremely low fields, and you see the picture of the Earth there. So these are produced by the Earth when lightning strikes in the ionosphere. So that's the part of the atmosphere that's about 100 kilometers above the Earth, and those frequencies are 7.83, 14, 20, 28, 33, 39, and 45 hertz. So these are the Schumann resonances. That's the resonance of the Earth. So it's in the extremely low frequency in the chart. So we're all familiar with the different types of radiation on this chart. As the frequency goes higher, you see that there's the electromagnetic radiation of computer monitors, radio, TV, our mobile devices, kind of there around 800 hertz to 2600 gigahertz, which is actually in the microwave frequency, which most people are surprised to hear. A microwave cooks at about 2.45 gigahertz very specifically, and its main power obviously is the production of heat, but there's a range of frequencies known as microwave, including background radiation from the universe and satellite frequencies and radar. So there are then the visible light frequencies and the UV rays or ultraviolet, and we know that those damage DNA directly, and they create problems. So this is the beginning of the ionizing radiations, meaning that they excite atoms enough to move electrons. So you get free radical production, and that's what's actually making the DNA damage. In this range are X-rays, which of course we know of for imaging, but also for their effects on that direct DNA mutation if you get too much X-ray. Then there's radioactivity, so the kind that you would get from exposure to a nuclear power plant, and gamma cosmic rays, which are similar in frequency, and so you can get a kind of damage for those kinds of ray that you would get like if you were exposed to an atomic blast. So Earth is also blasted at intervals with gamma radiation. The last really big blast was October of 2022. And you can see, again, like these are all in a spectrum. And the only thing that's really changing here is how many waveforms per second there are. At the very end, you're getting a waveform that is 10 to the 18th power repetitions per second. It's an absolutely massive amount of waves coming at you in a second interval. So in physics, the energy of a frequency is literally directly related to your hertz level. So the higher the hertz, the more energy is inherent in the wave. However, that doesn't mean that the lowest frequencies are harmless. So lots depends on the type of radiation and the length of exposure and the person experiencing it. And every human being is a mix of frequencies. So humans emit a variety of frequencies, including electromagnetic radiation in the form of brain waves, nerve impulses are frequencies, muscle activity, the human voice, it's sound waves, all of us. Lots of that is actually frequencies you can't hear. Otoacoustic emissions, which are the frequencies that come out of your ear apparatus. The human body also emits heat in the form of infrared radiation. That's how you can get a heat camera and see people moving around in the dark. So in some ways, you are a radiation expert because your body is designed to collect and interpret frequency information. And that's the basis of your senses, conscious and unconscious. However, it is possible for people to suffer from unexplained headaches, fatigue, muscle aches, and insomnia that could potentially be related to electrosensitivity. And it's estimated that about 3 to 8% of populations in developed countries experience a pretty serious electrohypersensitivity. And probably 35% will experience mild symptoms, even if they don't realize that's where it's coming from. So this is according to Dr. Thomas Rao. So he's the medical director of the Paracelsus Clinic in Switzerland, whom I have had the good fortune of meeting in my anthroposophic studies. He also thinks that electromagnetic loads are part of what leads to cancer and concentration problems, ADD, tinnitus, migraines, etc., even potentially back pain. And certainly there is some evidence to show that this is the case. Here, we're looking at a graph. It is the frequency of electromagnetic hypersensitivity symptoms based on distance to cell phone base stations. Sorry, that title is a bit cut off there. And here, this is a study done in France. It's showing the top 16 medical symptoms reported and how likely they were to be reported based on the person's living distance to a cell phone base station. So a base station can often be found in your neighborhood. If you want to know where they are, just check out the maps available online. You can just say like Calgary cell stations map, and it literally will come up with a bunch of different updated maps that show them exactly where they're all. You're going to find them hidden a lot of the time in church towers, or sometimes not so hidden. Sometimes we know exactly where they are. But it always amazes me. One of the biggest ones in Edgemont is up in a church steeple, and they actually have two main broadcast stations there. So it's crazy, but true. So this is showing, again, like I said, the top, it's the top 16 symptoms. And so you see in the red here that there is, they're kind of naming every second one on the right, and then every second one on the left here at the bottom. So fatigue is at the top of the pile, and you can see here in the red group, this is somewhere between 0 and 10 meters away from a station. And then 10 to 50 meters around a station is the blue, 50 to 100 is the green, 100 to 200 is the brown, 200 to 300 is the yellow, and more than 300 is the black. So you can see as you get farther away from the tower, even though those symptoms still are reported and they actually look very similar to each other from line to line, obviously the height of the relative amounts is quite marked the closer that you get to the tower. So the number of respondents experiencing those symptoms very often is the percentage point on that height axis. So that is a bit concerning, I think. And even though this study was done in France, you are probably going to have some similar reports in lots of areas of Canada and the United States. Certainly, when you look at the map for between Edmonton and Calgary, you just see a really big zone of especially cell frequencies. So a lot of those who complain of electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndromes, just walking into a coffee shop that has Wi-Fi can be debilitating. It can really trigger a wide array of symptoms, including headache, fatigue, nausea, burning and itchy skin, muscle aching. Some students actually have to drop out of school, or they just can't continue on to graduate programs once they become electrically sensitive. And that's irrespective, obviously, of intelligence and capability. Some people, just being on public transportation can be a debilitating experience. And it can take hours for people to kind of come out of that. Some people do not leave their homes because of these sorts of syndromes. And according to another one of my mentors, Dietrich Klinghardt, your physical bodies, such as body weight, body mass index, bone density, and your water and electrolyte levels, can really alter your conductivity and, as a consequence, your biological reactivity to electromagnetic fields. And he's also always made a note that children are particularly vulnerable to this kind of electromagnetic field. Here's a great example from a study done at the University of Utah that showed the microwave cell phone effects. And again, a cell phone operates in the microwave range. And this is the absorption in the brain according to age. So this is putting this cell phone near the ear and what that brain image looks like. And the younger the child, obviously, the deeper into the head these waves will go. So, I mean, still it's concerning to see that an adult absorption is still pretty marked. I mean, that's halfway into your head, but a 5-year-old should never have a cell phone up against its head. It's really nothing to laugh at, unfortunately. And even if you don't feel anything, you know, obviously some of the health effects are immediately apparent to sensitive populations. But most people seemingly feel fine when they're using technology, but it's not a guarantee of safety because some of the health conditions can take years or even decades of exposure to develop. And I think the perfect example here will be cancer. So on May 21st, 2011, so about 10 years after, not even 10 years after we started to see that drastic increase in fields around the world, the International Agency for Research on Cancer which is a committee of 27 scientists from 14 different countries working on behalf of the World Health Organization, concluded that exposure to cell phone radiation is a possible carcinogen, and they classified it into the 2B category. So this is the same category as the pesticide DDT, lead, gasoline engine exhaust, burning coal, and dry cleaning chemicals, just to name a few. So that's a pretty marked statement. And why is this? Well, you have a 6-foot length of DNA in each of your cells of your body that conducts electricity. In fact, DNA is so good at conducting electricity that it's used in nanotechnology as a construction material. It's also coiled, when it's coiled, in a fractal shape, and that basically makes it a fractal antenna. So it can actually pick up and react to a wide range of electromagnetic fields. So that means that the electromagnetic fields in the environment can interact with your DNA. It's the most sensitive large molecule in your body to those fields. DNA obviously is self-replicating molecules. So as cells divide, your DNA duplicates itself so that each daughter cell has a complete copy of your genome. But that is not a perfect process, and you make replication errors and breaks in the strands. And there are mechanisms for repairing those kinds of damages in the cell. And sometimes, of course, it's not of no consequence, but sometimes there's more damage that can be fixed, and it's possible to make mutations that are passed to daughter cells, mutations that continue on in that replicated DNA will really basically be a mechanism for the onset of cancer, potentially. So there was a study at the University of Washington that showed that EMF exposures of only 2 hours increased DNA strand breaks in brain cells of living rats, and that DNA in the brain continued to break down for hours after the exposure ended. So there isn't just immediate damage, but also reactive damage. And in a review article looking at about 100 articles about this kind of damage, just over half the studies showed these kinds of genotoxic effects. Another, just under half didn't, but even 20% of those showed that the EMF potentiated the effects of other toxins in the cell on the DNA. So just having toxic exposures plus the electromagnetic field could be part of this effect. And this could be some of the differences. So people's exposures to other agents could be playing a role. There's also evidence that electromagnetic fields create cellular stress in the body. So in experiments, it's been shown that under that exposure, you get the creation of certain proteins that are only expressed when something is damaging a cell. So like UV light or alcohol or viral infections, presence of heavy metals, low oxygen conditions, and heat. So this kind of protein is called a heat shock protein. And those heat shock proteins, when they're expressed, can help you to heal from these kinds of damages, including EMF. But there's a limit to what they can repair. And so an extended exposure can reduce your cell's capacity to manufacture those protective proteins, and other toxins are then more damaging. Studies that monitor cancer risks in populations over time have shown consistent associations with cell phone use in cancer, increasing over time and with more use. So if you have consistent phone use, your risk for a one-sided brain tumor goes up by 2.4 times. Most people hold their cell phone always on one side of the head, and that's why there's a distinct one-sidedness to it. Children that use mobiles at ages younger than 20 have a 5.2 times risk of developing glioma brain cancer over time. There's also studies that show increases in salivary gland tumors with cell phone use. So you have a couple of different salivary glands. One's in your cheek, and then there are other ones under your tongue and jaw. But in the studies, people who use cell phones get the salivary gland tumors on their cheek only. You see the consistent rise in those types of tumors where the phone is closer, and the ones that are under the chin or behind the jawbone don't go up. It's quite marked, and in theory, it's the same set of glands. So you think if there be a more central process, you would see it in all of those glands, but you don't. So as you can see, in some ways, it's hard to study this problem. It's ironic in part because the increase in the use of the microwave frequencies has really only skyrocketed in the last 2 decades, and some of the diseases it could potentially contribute to are not instantaneous in nature. It's like the relationship between tobacco smoking and cancer. It took time to see the trend and very much longer to prove it. And it's taken as a given now that there's a causal relationship, at least in part. But, everybody has a great uncle who lived to 100 smoking a pack a day. So, like I said before, there's differences in the vulnerability of people, and X doesn't always go to Y. But there's even more evidence of changes at the cell level. So, for example, it's been known since 1973 that 2.4 gigahertz band where the cell phones are mostly at decreases the capacity of the immune cells to respond properly in animals and humans. But bizarrely, that's exactly the band the world has been blanketed in. And during the pandemic, where was everyone? Inside with their devices going in their homes. Some people with all the equipment in their bedroom if they had a smaller home or no other good place to put it. So some of the effects of EMFs may also be related to your microbiome. And in one cancer textbook published in Europe, it stated that since we've learned that electromagnetic fields, even of minimal intensity, such as the endogenous electromagnetic fields, modify the human microbiome, their effects might be much more complex and far-ranging. Considering that the human microbiome is involved in the development and function of all other organs and systems, and most notably in the immune system, alteration of the microbiome may be one of the mechanisms through which the electromagnetic fields, both from outside and inside, exert the biological effects. So this is a big deal. It's foreseeable in the future that we're going to see a much stronger correlation with that as our microbiome research improves, because that statement was even made over 10 years ago, and our capacity to measure microbiome changes has improved quite a bit. Now, if somebody also has a chronic infection like EBV, so that's Epstein-Barr virus, or HPV, human papillomavirus, or if people have Lyme or mold exposures, EMFs really appear to potentiate the damage. And often those exposures are in the history of people who seem more sensitive. So it does become a bit of a muddle in the timeline to figure out why somebody is so affected. Now, what should you do to protect yourself from EMF? I've observed that most people just want a quick fix to this EMF problem, but there really is no quick fix. So we're going to take a look at some of the things that you might do to change your exposures. First and foremost, I would suggest you try to measure it. You can buy reasonable devices for measuring how much electric, magnetic, and radio frequency fields you have around you. The cheapest ones won't be like amazing, but they will give you an idea of how strong the fields are around you. I have one as an example. It's called a GQ EMF 390, and it's just a handheld device that when you switch it on will literally, you can see how much of those 3 different frequencies there are in the place where you're at. And as you move it closer and farther to certain devices, you can get a sense of what kind of fields you're sitting in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the different fields coming from different places in a moment here, but easy to get a hold of. There's a number of different ones. The best kinds of measuring devices will be very expensive, and they're normally only used by engineers for other purposes. But more recently, they have been used to take a look through people's homes. So, but always start with the basic things. And let's talk about some of these fields so that I can give you a better sense of it. So let's look first at electric fields. So these are the fields that emanate from anything that has voltage. So basically anything electric. So lamps, electrical wiring, outlets, extension cords, appliances, and power outlets. And electric fields can affect electrical communication in your body. So they can affect your brain waves, the ability of your neurons to fire. It can impede intercell communication anywhere in your body. Health problems that can manifest as a result of this type of exposure include neurological and behavioral changes, altered cell growth, cell mutations again, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and again, cancer. So the first step that you can actually do is unplug things or minimize things being plugged in, especially at night and in the room where you sleep. So you can actually install kill switches in your house that turn off power to all non-essential things that you don't need at night. Many electronic devices that we have are not really off when they're off. They're on standby. So there's electricity going through them. And you don't need the TV on standby unless you can't wait a few minutes to get the TV running, which you will have to do if you actually unplug it. So turn off what you can or place things as far away from yourself, especially while sleeping, as you can. There may also be a good idea to get something that is non-plug in as an alarm clock. That would be extremely useful. So a battery powered old style clock doesn't have a big field. It has a tiny battery in it. In Canada, well, in Europe, building standards are quite different. And a lot of the EMFs are mitigated by different building strategies. So in Germany, they run wiring through grounded copper conduit, and they use coatings on the backs of wallboard to prevent fields from passing through. So, we might not all be able to just rip out all your drywall and start over, but you can do some things that are like this. So you can invest in shielding paint, especially in areas where you sleep. So you can actually buy a paint. You can paint that on your drywall and then repaint over it with whatever color. And it's a paint that contains materials that basically prevent EMF penetration. And they're quite easy to find nowadays. A few coats of that paint will help many very sensitive people. And if you were going to choose places to do that, you're going to want to choose your sleeping area because most people sleep about a third of their lives. And so if you can sleep in a neutral zone, it's better for your health. So how your house is wired will have an impact, and your whole house may not have the same amount of field. So it turns out that running the hot and the neutral wires together can actually significantly reduce EMF in the wall. Sometimes they're not run like that. So it depends a little bit on who built your house. Restricting the use of certain appliances can cut down your exposure. So you can see some common household appliance exposures here. A hair dryer, that's 4 inches from your head is quite a strong electric field. A vacuum is really a strong field. A fluorescent lamp is a strong field. A microwave doesn't have a large electric field, but it obviously used microwaves to cook food, and they're actually designed to leak radiation, and that leakage increases over time, and it's not shielded to protect you. I don't personally think microwaves are essential for life, so I would consider not having one. I personally haven't had one for over 2 decades. I refuse to heat my lunch like that at work. I have a little toaster oven to do that. Also has a field, but it's not microwaves. Try not to actively be using electronics that are charging. So when you plug in your phone or plug in an iPad or a computer, it intensifies the field you're exposed to. Now, if you are moving or desire to move, make sure your house is not too close to all those electrical lines. That's another good goal. In general, the taller the tower, the more power is going through the line. So again, Canadian rules about how close those can be to homes is very different than other countries. I would personally only try and buy a house at least 1 kilometer away if you can. Long-term studies have really shown that even since the 1970s, that the childhood leukemia risk, as an example, is related to the exposure of that child to fields over their lifetime. And that's especially true when you live at one address close to a line like that. There's another phenomena called dirty electricity as well, and that's when the EMF noise is picked up by the power lines. The power grid is unfortunately its own kind of giant radio antenna. So people get exposed to this kind of contamination EMF when it's delivered into a home on top of the clean 60 hertz field that comes into the house from the utility company. And that's actually thought to be a source that contributes quite a bit to health problems, because you're basically bringing in frequencies that are not even the ones that you paid for. And of course, if you're in a career when you're exposed to a lot of fields, that's another type of risk. And you might consider using EMF shielding clothing to help reduce risk. And yes, that kind of clothing exists. It doesn't look like an obvious tinfoil hat. But if you got an electrician in your family or military people, people that work in the hospital with all the machines, people who use a lot of power tools, like even dentists, rail line workers, especially on a train like a C train where there's a current in the rails, air traffic controllers, all of those people should be radiation shielded. It's been shown that all of those careers actually have an increased risk of various types of EMF field complications. Now, there's also magnetic fields. So magnetic fields are technically a class 3 carcinogen. So this kind of field can occur especially when there's an imbalance in electrical wiring and around electrical motors, like the motor in your refrigerator. A major source of magnetic field is next to the main power meter for your house. So you definitely want to avoid sleeping up against a wall that has a power meter on the outside. Electric clock radios also generate magnetic fields. Fortunately, the effect drops off pretty dramatically with distance. So putting distance at least 5 or 6 feet between yourself and that source is often sufficient to drastically reduce the amount of EMF, like especially if you use one of these little handheld meters to measure. I've noticed, if I put that right up against my desktop computer, that pumps out a pretty big field super close up. Now, hopefully I'm not staring that close at the computer. And as long as I stay, 3 feet or so back, which on my desk is possible because I actually put it right up against the wall and I'm a good 3 feet away. It's substantially less where I'm sitting. So if you have a smart meter, that's the new kinds of meters that the power companies installed all over the place. They're designed to be read at a distance. So the distance for safety there is actually quite a bit greater. It's about 40 feet. That's bigger than most people's home dimensions. But you can get a cover for it that reduces the EMF substantially without really affecting the reading of the meter. But depending on where your neighbor's meters are, you could be affected by also where theirs is. And those covers basically use the concept of a Faraday cage. It's a design that's a fine metal fiber that's woven closely enough to block the EMFs. You can probably get a bag that will go over the radiating part of your smart meter for about probably about $50 or $60 Canadian. And then you might just have to convince your neighbors, depending on how far away you are from them, about covering theirs as well. Or maybe you could just cover it. They might not even notice. Most people I realize don't even know where their meter is. Or if they do know where it is, it's in a weird place, or they don't think about it too much, or they never look at it. So you might have to buy your whole neighborhood some meter covers if you're in one of those places. So obviously wireless communications are an issue. We've talked about this already a little bit. So cell phones, cell towers, wireless routers, cordless phones are all big emitters. And yes, that's the cordless phones that are plugged into your wall. All those types of technologies expose you to electric and magnetic fields. So a cordless phone actually broadcasts at 2.4 to 5.8 gigahertz as well, along with their base stations that emit actually extra low field radiation from the AC power source, as well as radio frequency and microwave radiation to communicate with the handset. So there's also a kind of cordless phone that has DECT technology, that's digital enhanced cordless telecommunications, and that actually transmits microwave radiation constantly. They don't just transmit when the phone's in use. A cell phone, like we saw before, is really intense when it's held on your body. We saw those pictures of it being held up to the head. So cell phones technically have a SAR value. That's the specific absorption rate, and it's supposed to tell you how much energy there's been being absorbed from the radiation. It's reported in watts per kilogram of body mass. Unfortunately, those values are calculated in a lab, and a single value doesn't really accurately represent what you actually absorb from the phone. So the max permitted SAR is supposed to be 1.6 watts per kilogram, but like even an Apple admits that value is exceeded if you hold your phone closer than 5/8 1/8 of an inch away from your head, and or if you hold it at an angle that's different than how it was tested in the lab. So the phone manufacturers don't actually publish the SAR for where you hold it against your head. And it doesn't take into account how much radiation you're absorbing over time. So it's not really a useful measure of how much a phone is affecting you. So I know a lot of people use their earbuds with phones, like wireless ones are basically radiation literally coming in from the device into your ear canals. The wired ones are not a huge amount better. They'll still transmit a field into your head. So you can either get air tube earphones. Those are sold in lots of places. Or you can get what's called a ferrite bead. So it's you probably have seen something similar on electronics cables where they have that cylinder that is probably maybe an inch, or sometimes they're a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, somewhere along the length of the wire, close to where the little transformer boxes are. So that's a ferrite bead that's built into the wire, but you can actually buy them to snap onto your earbud cable, and that'll reduce the field about 90 to 95% going into your head. Don't forget, you can also get shielding case for your phone, and that's essential, especially if you have somebody wearing their phone in a pocket or a purse close to the body. You can actually buy ones that completely block the field, but then you don't get phone calls or texts until it's out of the sleeve. That's true, incidentally, also about shielding paints. So if you do an amazing job of shielding paint in your room, you will block cell radiation, including the cell signals that will go to your phone. Now, that's probably a good idea at night, frankly, but it's a bit disconcerting for people when they spend all this money and then they can't take a phone call in their bedroom. So you just have to be aware of that. So people have asked a lot about 5G, and so currently it's mostly 4G technology in use. So that relies on a 90-foot cell tower with about a dozen antenna ports on it. The 5G system uses small cell facilities or bases, so each of them have about 100 little antenna ports, and these are slowly being installed across the city. They're not all across the city yet. There's only a couple of corridors that are really already got the 5G antennas. So the 5G, it stands for fifth generation. It's not like a different wave or anything. It's just, it's supposedly a way of creating faster internet and streaming and cell phone coverage, et cetera, et cetera. It relies primarily on the bandwidth of the millimeter wave. So it's mmW. That's between 30 gigahertz and 300 gigahertz. Remember I said that the main cell phones are kind of more in the 2 to 5 range. So the millimeter wave is known to penetrate into human skin tissue, and it's been linked to a number of potential health problems, including eye problems, heart rate variability problems and arrhythmia, pain, suppressed immune function, and depressed growth and increased antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So again, this is something that you can protect yourself from in your house in some ways. Obviously these things go through lots of different building materials. And ideally, what you want to do is you want to reduce your exposure in general and increase your distance or put shielding in place. One thing you can do if you're not into shielding painting your room is you can actually get a metal Faraday type fabric cube to shield your bed. It could cost you less than completely redoing your bedroom, obviously, but it uses fabric around the bed like a big cube, and that basically reflects back or doesn't allow it to penetrate pretty much all the frequencies coming at it. They cost about $1,000, and they in essence kind of look like a big mosquito net. So they are metal, or they have metal fibers, so they look kind of gray or brownish depending on what metal is in there, like if it's silver or copper. And they should always also have a floor piece to protect under the bed. And then that material is actually plugged into a ground to discharge the field. You do have to be a bit careful and actually make sure that your ground is a ground. Some older homes don't actually come with a grounding wire. That was like a newer thing that kind of came into wiring over time. Now, using your laptop computer on your lap is paradoxically not a very safe way to use it. So just as the research is emerging showing that the cell phone should actually not be held right next to your head. So again, 5/8 of an inch away from your body or ear for kind of quote unquote safe operations, says Apple. Research is also showing that spending long hours with the laptop on your lap, the use for technically which it is intended, is likely harmful. So you can lessen that EMF exposure by using an external keyboard, because even typing on your laptop exposes you to higher EMFs. Only using it when it's battery powered, not while it's plugged in if you can, because the power supply from the laptop induces a pretty strong electrical current density. But laptops are one of the highest sources of EMF. The underside can emit 40 to 100 milligauss. That's 40 to 100 times higher than the standard limit for EMF exposure. So a high tension power line has 10 to 70 milligauss. So the older the laptop, the higher the EMF. So the minimum distance recommended, because it drops, like I said, as you go farther away, is 20 centimeters. So you can usually find like a lap desk that'll lift it up that high, and you can get a shielding mat to go under the laptop. And like I said, run it with the battery when instead of running it when it's plugged in where you can, because you will decrease the amount of exposure. So your reproductive health can be at risk on exposure to EMF. So after there's studies that have shown that if it's close to a body, a laptop induces currents that's probably about 34 to 49% of the maximum recommendations for non-ionizing radiation. And then if you put the power in, the current densities like in a pregnant person, so the current densities in a fetus, in a pregnant woman, could potentially be almost 500% higher than the basic restriction to prevent adverse health effects. So if you're a man who uses a laptop often and you want to have children in the future or just protect your reproductive health, there was a warning published in the journal Fertility and Sterility that says basically we speculate that keeping a laptop connected wirelessly to the internet on a lap near the testes may result in decreased male fertility. And actual experiments done with men show that men using a phone for more than 4 hours per day, and that's just a phone, had a 40% lower sperm count than those who didn't use it at all. Those were also dose-response relationships between the cell phone and the sperm count. Also motility, variability, and morphology, meaning some of them were actually all screwed up in terms of what they look like because of the field, or it was an increase in morphology changes. A study on almost 1,000 women showed that miscarriage increases in high exposure EMF by an average of 80%, 220% for early miscarriage, and among women who've had prior miscarriages by almost 400%. And a study that was measuring the kids over a 13-year period who were children born to moms with higher EMF exposure, basically greater than 2 milligauss, were 3.5 times more likely to develop asthma. And again, it was a clear dose response effect where for every single milligauss increase, while that woman was pregnant, there was a 15% increased rate of asthma and offspring. Child obesity is also correlated to this. So these are really dramatic potentials that we have to pay attention to. Now, all of us have wireless routers probably in our home. There's very few people that directly wire their computers, although that is probably quite a bit safer. And ideally, you want to put your desktop in airplane mode if you don't need it to be actively on the internet. If you have to use Wi-Fi, you're going to shut it off when it's not in use. So especially at night when you're sleeping, just turn it off. And if you have a bedroom near a wireless router, like I said, there's no clearly defined safe distance. It's a newer issue. Some people think 10 feet at a minimum, but probably more like 40 feet will be better for your body. And radiation from those routers pass right through the walls in your home. So you just have to keep that in mind as you evaluate the safety of where your bedroom is. And those people who are sensitive to EMFs have to take the extra effort. You can put your Wi-Fi in a Faraday cage similar to your smart meter. So that'll decrease the amount of EMF it emits. Sometimes that will affect performance depending on where that Wi-Fi router actually is. So you can change the risk there while you maintain the function somewhat. Like I said before, limit electricity. Shut off the electricity to your bedroom at night. That helps a lot. And make sure you use an EMF meter to figure out what things around you are, like when you lay down in your bed, what kind of fields are around you. You can make some differences, and you can certainly unplug or move a lot of things. Trying to, charge your cell phone in another room, ideally. The wireless charging systems are actually worse. So lots of people invested or think those are really cool. They are kind of really cool, but just don't sleep beside it, please. Spend less time on your cell phone. And like I said, if you carry it on your body, put it in airplane mode. Use the speakerphone, hold the phone away from you, or like I said, get some of those air tube sets. And just use it only where the reception is good. The weaker the reception, the more power your phone has to use to transmit. The more power it uses, the more radiation it emits, and that deeper that dangerous waves penetrate into your body. So use your phone with full bars and good reception, and you'll actually minimize that. And like I said, if ideally you're going to put your phone away from your body, putting your cell phone in a shirt pocket over your heart is asking for trouble. It just like placing it in your pocket, right aimed at your reproductive organs, is not a good idea. If you have teenagers, buy them sleeves or cases that have EMF protection on them. The stickers are not enough. The stickers do change certain parts of the spectrum, but they don't protect you from all of it. And so you can use those, but for what those are worth, you might as well just buy a cover. Now, in addition to reducing exposure, you also going to want to support your body. So the best thing you can actually do is eat a good diet. Your capacity to repair is related to how well supplied you are. And like I noted before, be well hydrated. It's a buffer. It's a thermal buffer. It's a radiation buffer. Think about what happens in your microwave when there's not enough water in the food that you're microwaving. I remember this from when I was a kid. I remember my parents got probably one of the first microwaves that ever existed. I remember they cost $800. This is probably like 40 years ago when they kind of really started to coming out with the big microwaves. And if you put something in there that doesn't have enough fluid, it just basically burns from the inside out. And you're like that as well. So make sure you have that thermal buffering, that frequency buffering. It's been shown that if you provide gut barrier support, you'll have decreased symptoms of electrosensitivity. So again, we're seeing cross reactions between different systems in your body. Reducing your toxic burden is a good idea. It's become far more important than it ever was before. So not only are you dealing with increased amounts of toxic chemicals in your environment, but your body's full of microorganisms that respond to electromagnetic fields. And how they do that is they generate increased levels of their own toxins. So I wonder sometimes if some of that actually is affecting like the people who have SIBO as an example. Now, there also is a high correlation between mold growth and EMF. One study actually showed that 600 times more neurotoxins are generated from mold in a high EMF environment. So there's lots of legal cases being reviewed and assessing if problems in buildings are actually related to the nearby antenna infrastructure. I don't know if you've seen how many apartment buildings are completely inundated with these kinds of antenna on the top. If you know somebody who's living, within 10 feet of that, I would encourage them to move. If you're living within 10 feet of that, the lowest floors of a building are actually safer in lots of different ways, including from geomagnetic fields that we have a lot of in Calgary because we have granite underneath us. And so there's geomagnetic fields as well. So those are earth frequencies, and they're actually more intense when they're higher up off the ground. That's a totally different topic, but certainly stay on the bottom levels of an apartment building. And of course, spreading awareness about this problem is a good idea, especially to your family and children. I wouldn't rely on other people to protect you against these things. There's a lot of things that I've just told you that most people have never heard before, which is scary, and mitigation strategies that most people have never heard of also. So very important things. So Fitbits and other devices that people sleep with should be put in airplane mode. A lot of those devices will actually record off the body without needing to spread that to another device. So you can turn off, I think, on lots of devices. Like I wear an Oura Ring, and the Oura Ring can be put in airplane mode. It still collects data. But then when you turn off the airplane mode, it just downloads the stored data onto your device. So usually you can do that, Sharon. And Rhonda, I think I answered this question about wireless earpieces. They basically are definitely a field generation. I would not walk around with one of those all the time. And see if you can find other ways of doing it. So any other questions there? Those are the only 2 questions I've got up there for you guys. Are you just flabbergasted and desperately Amazoning shielding paint right now? You know, that happens. So we are just about to I'm just about to create the next Alleviate webinar series list. So I have a number of different things planned. I'm always open to hearing about other things that you might be interested in hearing about. I think we're going to do deconstructing food cravings this year. We're going to do a thing about chocolate. We're going to do something about metabolic syndrome. I'm thinking about doing a Breathe for the Brain webinar, and then a handful of kids ones on the Helping Dr. Mom side. So if there's something in particular that you want to hear about, I'm just writing the new calendar for those events now. So I'm open to suggestions. And is the water meter a smart meter as well? Not usually. But don't quote me on that. I don't think so, though. I think it's just on a spin. Yeah, Rhonda says she's shocked about some of these things. I would be too. I'm always reminded every time I research a topic like this about how amazing it is. Like, these technologies are amazing and wonderful and really cool, but we also tend to be a little bit, let's implement first and ask questions later for most things. And that's come back to bite us as a species, I think, more times than one. Yeah. So thank you for coming. Thank you for asking your questions. I'm hoping that, oh, I see Martinez actually also already Amazon shopping. So air tubes for headphones. It's actually a type of headphone set, Christina. The air tube headphones are actually a type of headphone. So if you Google those, you will find a set. And they're not super spendy, but they just don't use a wire. All right. So I'm sorry to have scared you. I love you all. Thank you so much for coming. And if you think of other questions or other topics that you would like to hear about, please let me know. All right. Good to see you. Have a splendid day. Thanks for watching. I love to connect to my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. Don't forget to check out whole-life-medicine.com for more webinars and events.